Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, May 5th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the Ohio primary election that occurred on May 3rd, 2022, just 2 days ago, where the Republican Party mainly had a very competitive race here, where they had a Senate election in which there was a Republican primary where three candidates were in the top three in polling data, in fundraising numbers, and practically everywhere else, where they ultimately ended up with just one candidate winning, J.D. Vance, with less than 1/3 of the vote. Now, the state of Ohio is a hotly contested state because the Democratic Party and the Republican Party both think they have a very good shot at victory. More realistically speaking, Republicans are more than likely going to win the Senate election this November, but nothing is solidified. The Democratic Party, while very historically does not have a good chance in the state of Ohio, looking at it from that context, I will say that if a Republican was to screw up, Ohio isn't exactly a state where it's a 30% Trump margin where it would be near impossible, like Alabama in 2017, but not entirely impossible for a Democrat to win. It would actually be quite likely if a Republican was to slip up or make a comment that we have seen this election cycle as well for some special elections where some Republicans have made some comments that ultimately have resulted in their loss in some pretty strong Trump areas. But I don't know if J.D. Vance is the candidate that would ultimately see the general election as something that could be, or at least that he would be able to mess up in time for the general election to actually occur. There was one candidate in specific who came in second place in this Republican primary who I was saying time and time again that if the Republican Party was to nominate this candidate, I'm going to say his name, Josh Mandel, if they were to nominate Josh Mandel, they probably would have a significantly lower chance at winning the general election should he become the nominee. I still think they would have been likely to win the general election. I just think the Democratic Party might have had a more realistic shot at victory. Right now with J.D. Vance, it doesn't look as if Tim Ryan is going to make have a realistic threat to J.D. Vance's rise to the United States Senate, but we will see what happens because, of course, American politics changes overnight, very, very quickly. So what happened in the state of Ohio was that the race initially started out with a different frontrunner. That frontrunner was, surprisingly enough, not anyone who scored in the top three. The polling data, if you go out to the maximum average, actually had Gibbons ahead at 18%. Josh Mandel at 19%. Mandel at 18%, Vance at 11%, Dolan at 8%. Now, Dolan is a name that I mentioned because he was someone who rose to sudden popularity during the final stretch of the campaign. You take a look at these numbers here and you find that earlier on at one point, just a month ago today, he was at 6% statewide. And all of a sudden, he ends up performing at 22% in the polls. And guess what the results are? There you have it, 23%. The numbers in the polls were actually very accurate. I'm quite pleased by the accuracy of some of these numbers. It shows all of these candidates in this position where they're not exactly taking away by a significant amount. But the point being that you saw a different race 3 months ago. So what changed? How did J.D. Vance go from someone who, in initial polling data, was only in third place to winning the Republican primary? And it mainly comes down to one person, not J.D. Vance, not Josh Mandel, but President Donald Trump. Donald Trump made an endorsement for J.D. Vance about 3 weeks ago. This was April 15th, 2022. And in that endorsement, he had essentially said that J.D. Vance would be right for the state of Ohio. Now, Donald Trump actually forgot J.D. Vance's name when he came out to a rally a few days ago, saying that, referring to the guy in Ohio, or his exact words, calling him J.D. Mandel, or J.P. Mandel. It was a very weird interaction. It was a very weird statement to be said, especially knowing that Donald Trump had made the endorsement for J.D. Vance. Truly speaking, I think he got a little bit of a nudge from the top Republican Party saying, Josh Mandel probably is the least electable Republican at this point in time. He has baggage with his family. He ran for Senate in 2012 and lost, ran for Senate in 2018 and dropped out. I mean, he didn't exactly have a good track record, but I do think that potentially had Josh Mandel also not gone down some different pathways that were very clearly in an effort to appease President Trump's supporters and win over that voting group, that maybe he would have gotten the backing from the National Republican Party and he wouldn't be in this position where he is right now. I will say Josh Mandel of 2012 is not the same Josh Mandel as we see today. He was a much more moderate, traditional conservative. It is very clear when politicians pander and shift their beliefs, or at least public beliefs, because obviously they can have private reservations, in an effort to win a primary. A primary is probably the most potentially competitive part for Republicans in Ohio. This primary election is important Because what it tells us is that the Republican nominee is going to be this person here who ends up winning the general election with nearly a 90% chance, regardless of who it was, at least if we were looking at it from just a standard point of view. Josh Mandel veered hard to the right, very, very hard to the right, because it was very clear what he was trying to do. He was trying to shake the previous association of his name and his ideology with other Republicans that were not President Trump. When he ran in 2018, he wasn't nearly as extreme. There are literally videos out there of Josh Mandel burning masks in an effort to try to push down on mask mandates. All of these things are very performative in an essence, and very clearly in an effort to get that endorsement from President Trump. And when he didn't get it, what it did was take away the voting group that Josh Mandel was appeasing. The other thing, too, I think that resulted in J.D. Vance's victory, not only was the Trump endorsement beneficial for obvious reason, but it sort of made it so all of these top candidates here were very similar in their actions, very similar in how they reacted to specific things, how they answered questions at debates, how they went up against certain candidates, the ads that they poured out. All of them were trying to be the next Donald Trump from the state of Ohio, but had just one of them, especially Josh Mandel, stuck to their traditional, conservative, normal method, you would find that Josh Mandel likely would have resulted in getting that anti-Trump vote. Keep in mind, John Kasich won the Republican primary in Ohio. Things like that aren't forgotten. And I think every Republican here completely forgot it. At least they aren't forgotten for people like myself who look at this and say, had there been just one candidate who potentially pushed away from the narrative of President Trump, they might have been able to win because of the vote being split so tremendously. I would also like to say that it probably wouldn't happen unless it was Josh Mandel or J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance has a very fascinating history, not something I'm going to get into because I want to talk about that in another video because potentially that could be something used against him later down the line. But, and of course, that does deserve some sort of explanation and exploration. But Josh Mandel, I do think, could have survived this primary, but just didn't play his cards correctly. Just simply did not play his cards correctly. So when Trump endorsed a candidate, it's not exactly impressive that this Trump-endorsed candidate got 32.2% of the vote, but the fact that they won is very impressive. The fact that they won, the fact that they went from being in fourth to first is quite impressive, to say the least. So I'm not going to take away from J.D. Vance's accomplishments by any means. What I am trying to say, though, is that I wouldn't exactly say 32.2% for someone who has the endorsement of President Trump for 3 weeks now. It is a number that I am super, I would say that I would be super excited about if I was looking at it from an outsider point of view, which I am, but especially on the Republican side. But of course, it is a victory regardless, and J.D. Vance will be facing Tim Ryan in the general election. So what do we see on the Democratic side? I mean, we're going through these primary results, but truly they aren't as important. Tim Ryan was the front runner from the very beginning. There actually was a race in the governor election here. Mike DeWine ended up winning. This is also something that I do think is worth exploring in another video, again, because this is a completely separate race. A Republican here, Republican governor, the Democratic candidate here, Nan Whaley, she ended up winning 65% of the vote. Wasn't really that contested, but Mike DeWine, on the other hand, as the incumbent Republican governor, only got 48% of the vote. Jim Renacki got 28%, Joe Blystone got 22%, which means the combined vote against the incumbent governor was actually more than the governor's overall vote share. And typically that incumbency factor is the main thing. Had Mike DeWine not been the incumbent, I do not think he would have won. Even though he has statewide name recognition, he's lost races before, and I think this would have been one of them had he not been the incumbent. But again, topic and discussion for another video, but point being that Mike DeWine ended up winning this primary here. But the Senate election is where I really think the Republican Party at least partially lucked out. I think Josh Mandel would have been the worst nominee, but I don't think J.D. Vance is exactly this exceptional candidate either. But at the end of the day, the state itself is still Republican. You take a look at the election history in the House elections, Democrats are winning here. In some cases, in Senate elections in 2018, you can take a look. Sherrod Brown ended up winning against Jim Renacki, who was actually the same one who opposed Mike DeWine in the Republican primary here. But beyond that, you really don't see many victories. Democrats lose the House. They lose the presidency in Ohio. The last time they won it was with Obama in 2012, and that was a 3-point margin. In 2008, it was a 4.6% margin. So in a wave election where Obama won 365 electoral votes, in 2012 where Obama won 332 electoral votes, Trump outperformed both performances for Obama in the state of Ohio in 2016. Not only did he outperform Obama, but he outperformed Bush, let's see here, Clinton again. Let's see, in 88, not H.W. Bush. So Donald Trump is the best performing candidate, Democrat or Republican, in Ohio since 1988, and that even continues into 2020. In 2016, Donald Trump won Ohio by 8.1%. Keep in mind, this is a state that Hillary Clinton campaigned in, fought in, spent millions upon millions of dollars in because Democrats thought it would be competitive. Well, the result is Donald Trump wins by 8.1. Fast forward to 2020, what do you find? Donald Trump wins by 8. Keep in mind, this is the Joe Biden election. Joe Biden flipped Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, but couldn't flip Ohio. Not only he couldn't flip Ohio, but it wasn't even that competitive. Texas was closer than Ohio. That's the shocking part. Texas was closer than Ohio. Florida was closer than Ohio. North Carolina was closer than Ohio. All of these Trump states where Ohio typically is the more competitive one. At least not necessarily North Carolina and Florida, but maybe even on par with them. But Texas, by no means. You go back to 2012, Obama's winning Ohio by 3, Romney's winning Texas by 16. It's evident coalitions have changed, but that Ohio is moving in a rightward direction. And that's why, no matter who won this election, they still would have been the favorite to win the general. That is also what has been very consistent when you take a look at the election ratings for the state of Ohio. No one really is changing much from there. You take a look at the Cook Political Report, what do they have? Ohio as lean Republican. But you take a look at other races, you take a look at other circumstances. Let's go ahead and see 2016. So we can go ahead and fast forward to 2022. So we can look at these ratings. What you find is that nearly everyone says the Democratic Party is not going to win here. That the Republicans will. Lean Republican, solid Republican, likely, lean. Real Clear Politics, I wouldn't exactly count as a resource that I typically look at for rankings. I definitely look at Politico. I definitely look at Larry Sabato. I definitely look at Cook. I definitely look at Inside Elections, and the consensus is clear. Republicans are winning. And these ratings haven't changed following the primary because J.D. Vance was just simply the right nominee to win. J.D. Vance was the right candidate to win this election because he is the one that was viewed largely as most electable. And when you take a look at, where these endorsements came from for J.D. Vance, it was because I think largely there was a nudge. But as you can see, it was very clear that Josh Mandel was this front runner very early on. It was very early on. I mean, looking at the numbers, J.D. Vance, when starting out, 2, 6, 4, 4, 6, 4%. Quite literally, Josh Mandel was the front runner for quite some time. And then that lead dissipated, and then the Trump endorsement came, and all you saw was that J.D. Vance skyrocketed in support following that endorsement. But I would also like to say that I think it was very clear why J.D. Vance was the endorsed candidate. I think that is something that I can very much explain to you, just simply because Josh Mandel probably was not viewed as the most electable candidate. At the end of the day, though, I think regardless of who won this Republican nomination for the state of Ohio, that the country right now is too much against the Democratic Party for Democrats to win here. Tim Ryan won that primary, no problem. But keep in mind, look at the primary turnout. 1 million voters in the Republican one, 500,000 in the Democratic one. I wouldn't exactly say looking at primary turnout numbers really matter that much. You also have to keep in mind that there was a much more competitive Republican race than there was a Democratic race. Everyone knew it was going to be Tim Ryan. Nobody was really worried about that. But at the end of the day, too, you have to take everything into consideration when we look at this race, and nothing is telling me the Democratic Party has significant levels of enthusiasm, has significant levels of support, has significant fundraising numbers. Everything sort of tells us the GOP is going to win here. National environment, Biden numbers, etc., etc., etc. The only saving grace for Tim Ryan and the Democrats in Ohio is that Tim Ryan has crossover appeal. But the question is, how much does that matter, especially in a red wave year? How much does that matter in a year like 2022? And the answer, unfortunately, for Democrats is probably not that much. Tim Ryan's crossover appeal was very limited in his district, and he almost lost in 2020. He was in a state where they drew him into a district where it was supposed to be a vote sink, and it ended up becoming more competitive. To be fair, this 13th district was a district that Donald Trump has done very well in. In 2018, Ryan won by 22. Even in 2016, he won by 36. But you can see that the vote over and over ended up to dissipate. 2012, it was a 46-point margin. 2014, it was 37. 2016, it was 36. 2018, it was 22. And then 2020, it was 8. It was 8. To be fair, I think that this election probably was the worst one for Democrats in the state of Ohio in terms of individual district recognition, individual district candidates. And I do think that Tim Ryan on his own is still competitive. I do think that he has still a level of crossover appeal, considering that his district wasn't always a Democratic district. But Tim Ryan, I think that crossover appeal, as shown by 2020, doesn't always matter and isn't always impactful. And I think that very well could be the case for 2022, which is the reason why, again, adds into this list of a string of things that show why the Republican Party maintains their advantage in Ohio and why it will likely continue through 2022, and why J.D. Vance lucked out in this primary on the back of Donald Trump and will likely win the general election. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I also want to say, taking away from the traditional outro, just a general thank you, guys. I am about to finish up my first year in college, so I'm going to be heading home. I'm going to be making videos a lot more often for you guys. Not entirely sure what I'm going to be doing this summer, but that's something that we will talk about together. I'll make a more updated video about what my summer plans look like to give you a general idea of what's upcoming and what new types of content I'm going to be adding into the mix. I hope you guys are excited for that. I hope you guys stick around for the summer, and I can't wait to get more into the midterms with you guys. And again, to reiterate, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you all later today.